Welcome back to another episode of the Tap HR podcast and YouTube channels. We record both at the same time. So today I'm joined by the fabulous Tina from Human Decision. So Tina, welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to meet you and great to be here, Trish.
Fabulous. So today we're talking about perfectionism, and I think in some way it probably impacts everyone in different ways, shapes and forms. But before we get started, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Yes, I'm a midlife career coach and therapist. I have a unique MSc in integrative counselling and coaching, and I've also completed an award-winning training in career coaching and counselling. And my final year of research for my MSc was actually in perfectionism, specifically in a corporate context, which I thought would be very relevant considering the HR connections for you, Trish. So my background is also HR. I'm CIPD qualified and have a background in HR and executive recruitment. So have an understanding of the different environments that people are working in, the issues they face. And ultimately, I want to support midlife professionals to take back control, rebalance, so they can create happier and sustainable ways of living, both practically and emotionally.
Amazing. So tell us a bit more about what perfectionism is then. So for people who don't really know what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, there's no real sort of cast iron sort of definition of perfectionism, but the one that most people will sort of recognize, I think, is striving for flawlessness in what they do, having and setting their own excessively high standards and being very self-critical.
And how do you know kind of where the balance is? Because I suppose excessively high standards to me could lead to you kind of, well, one, maybe making yourself ill, but setting an expectation that you can't meet.
Yeah.
But having some sort of standards kind of does make sense to me. So
it does.
Find balance.
I think that the difference is very much around the context that you're in. So is what are the standards expected for this piece of work, for example, in a work environment, and what you set yourself. And perfectionists will often set standards higher than is what realistically expected of them. And that's where the difference is. So they will try to go above and beyond potentially good enough. Yeah.
Useful phrase, isn't it? Good enough. I've heard of people talking about that.
Yeah.
And what would you say are the main causes of perfectionism?
The causes of perfectionism, there's a number. One of them is tying your self-worth to achievement. So you're only worth something if you've achieved X, Y, Z. It can come from early childhood experiences in terms of perhaps having parents that set unrealistic high expectations, fear and judgment of disapproval from others, and this links to self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy, but the main thing is fear of judgment and disapproval. So I think the main driver of perfectionism, which a lot of people don't realize, is fear. And the thing is, fear is not a particularly positive state to be in.
So when I think about my own kind of personal experience, when it comes to the work that I do, I think I'm pretty good at kind of getting to the point where things are good enough. Actually, internally, the standards that I have for myself are just ridiculously high, and I know they're ridiculous. But how? Hopefully, there are other people out there like me.
I'm a recovering perfectionist. I put my hands up as well on this one.
But like, how can people deal with that and manage that? Because exactly as you were saying, I find it really, really difficult because I'll be beating myself up in my head about things. That's not necessarily useful when it comes to kind of output, just health, really.
It is. It's about setting sort of key criteria that you want to achieve on something. So you potentially have a measure, and so this person has asked for X, and actually I'm only going to give them X. And I think sometimes as a perfectionist we want to add the cherry on top. And actually, for a client, quite often, and I speak to a lot of people about this, even my clients, is that when you're really good at something, you underestimate how good you are sometimes compared to what others know about what you do. So your understanding of HR and the law compared to a lot of the people you deal with is, vast, and that's why they hire you. So actually sometimes 101 to them is actually, brain surgery effectively. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's rocket science. But it's your 101.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah, it's your 101. And I do think sometimes people who have got skills and expertise in certain areas and have had them for a while, because for them it isn't right up here, then it's not good enough for the person they're delivering to. But it's actually the context that's important, not how you measure yourself against what you know and what you're delivering.
Okay.
And that's where the difference comes in.
And are there different types of perfectionism, or are we always talking about the same thing?
No, it's actually been extensively researched over a number of years, and there are a number of types of perfectionism. The one that sometimes comes up is something called maladaptive perfectionism, which is the negative side, and adaptive. So there are some hints that perfectionism can be potentially positive in some ways, but the original research on that did actually conclude that there wasn't enough literature at that point to actually back up adaptive perfectionism. The three main sort of areas of perfectionism that have been researched the most are self-orientated perfectionism, and that's the one we probably recognise the most, which is it's all about us assessing ourselves. We don't want any errors. We want things perfect, flawless, setting our own standards. And the other thing is being very self-critical, is what you sort of said. You've done something, but you're still being quite critical about what the end result is. The other one is other-orientated perfectionism, and that's expecting others to be perfect. Yeah, as well. And there's a third one called socially prescribed perfectionism, and that's a perceived expectation that others are exerting pressure on you to do things in a certain way. And that probably shows up very much today in social media, where you get people who see things and think that there's a pressure, they perceive there's a pressure on themselves to be that way. And it's a form of comparison effectively. As well.
I think I suppose I can only speak about my personal experience.
Yeah.
I think when I started my business, obviously you do the research, don't you? You have a look at HR consultants are doing, and you do sit there and just think, Jesus, these guys seem absolutely perfect. They're on it. The way they come across is brilliant, and I am nowhere near as put together. Which then does kind of trigger, I suppose, that what I was describing earlier, me setting my standards because so and so is doing it. But actually with social media, you only see like one part and a nuance of what people are doing. You
exactly.
You
only see the bits that they want you to see. And there is a recent fourth one that's actually sort of been sort of talked about in literature, which is perfectionist self-presentation. And that is non-display of imperfection or not disclosing any imperfection whatsoever. So that does go to your sort of, if we look at social media, that is, I'm not going to disclose anything in my life that's imperfect. So whenever, I'll take 100 selfies and only post one. I'll dress my room so that when I take a picture of the kitchen or whatever, it looks like a showroom. If I'm on holiday, I'm only going to post the best snaps. So anyone looking in only sees what you disclose, and you actually don't want to disclose any imperfection whatsoever. But that also can happen in a workplace environment, and it's actually quite it can be quite detrimental to actually be like that in a workplace.
Why do you think we're so driven to want to show up as perfect? Because I would like to think that in kind of rational society, we all know that we're human and we have flaws, and that's kind of what makes us unique and awesome. But we still seem to have this drive in some way, shape, or form to be perfect. But why? Where's that coming from?
There was some research done, and you're going to have to excuse me looking at some of my dates here. It was a bar study between 1989 and 2006. There was some research done on university and college leavers in the UK and the US, so it was Western orientated, and they found a significant increase in perfectionism in those individuals. And part of the background to that was the sort of societal change into sort of a meritocracy, and you were responsible for yourself. So you had if you did your best, you would get to X, which we all know there's a lot of environmental factors around that. And just because you want to get somewhere doesn't mean to say you're automatically going to get there. There's a whole range of factors that may support you. So that was one of the things they came up with. I have my own particular bugbear, which is the current situation we have with like Ofsted, where everyone's measured on grades. Schools are measured on grades, etc. And we've only got to look at that poor woman, if you saw in the press, who was going to have an Ofsted inspection and she actually took her life.
Yeah.
Because she was, the terror of the fear, which comes back to why perfectionism around fear of not getting outstanding again in her Ofsted inspection. And that is the worst that perfection can actually lead to. But the flip side is like the students. If schools are trying so hard to get all those top grades so they get outstanding, that pressure gets put down on the kids, that actually only top grades are worthy. And actually, if you don't get top grades, you're less than those that get top grades. So my own personal view is some of that comes through the education system. And then there's the whole, what I call the mythical career ladder. You've got to have the right qualifications, you've got to have the right university or whatever training, you've got to get the right first job, you've got to go up the career ladder, you've got to get the next job, and on and on and on it goes. But you and I both know that most careers are messy. Not everyone starts off with the right university or the right start in a job. I know loads of people now who are doing amazing things in their career, who, blundered around for the first few years, scraped university and blundered around and sort of explored stuff before they found out where they were going to end up, and have since gone on to be extremely successful, or have changed careers and not done something that they did earlier in their career, or life events have knocked them a bit off course and they've done something different. I was the same. I had a period of ill health. I ended up going in a different direction for a period of time. I even trained to be a college lecturer after a period of ill health. I wasn't sure I'd ever end up going back and doing certain things, and I never imagined in a million years I'd be doing what I'm doing now. So there's that pressure, I think, that stays with us, this belief that perhaps from a work perspective, it has to be like this. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, etc., etc., etc. So I think that sometimes feeds into this sort of feeling of inadequacy or lack of self-worth, which feeds into perfectionism and the fear of not being good enough or getting things wrong.
And you said earlier that you're a recovering perfectionist. So I don't. Hopefully, I'm not going to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine.
Your story and how you've kind of got to a space of recovery?
Yeah, because I think I realised it more setting up my own business because and doing my research, and I look back on various aspects in my career and things that perhaps held me back. And one of the elements of perfectionism is avoidance, because actually if you don't start something, then you can't not be good at it.
Yeah.
So avoidance and procrastination are elements of perfectionism, and I think that played out to some extent at times in my career, which had I not had that, things could have been different as well.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know we've talked about the topic quite broadly.
Yeah.
How does perfectionism kind of impact people in the workplace? I think we've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah. There are a number of things that sort of affects people. One of them is the avoidance and the procrastination can sometimes lead to people missing deadlines. And in the research that I did, this came out as one of the key things. People will actually miss deadlines because they don't want to that they don't start something quick enough because they procrastinate or avoid doing something. The other thing is that they will set unrealistic goals for themselves. That also plays into deadlines as well within an organisation, because if you set unrealistic deadlines, it takes you longer. So if we go back to what's required for the job and you put in the cherry on top because you think that's what you need to do to actually do a good job, then that takes you longer. The flip side of that is keep reiterating stuff. Iterate after, keep doing it over and over again until you think it's perfect. And that has an impact on individuals as well within the workplace. So they're the things that sort of tend to play out. Some people in the workplace who are perfectionist will not seek feedback and they will avoid feedback. As well. So these are some of the things that pay out as well. Because the thing is, feedback could then be negative. So they avoid the feedback for as long as possible and hope that once they've done it, they hand it in and it's perfect. But the thing is, if they do get some criticism, they'll be completely crushed, even if it's the smallest thing, and that will then feed into their "I'm not good enough" as well.
So obviously it's complex and feeds into emotion.
It does.
How can employers help kind of manage perfectionism in the workplace, or can they?
I think it's a really difficult one, actually, and this was sort of part of the concluding piece of my research, was that someone with perfectionism could be exhibiting two types of behaviour. One is they're not performing, and the other one that they're anxious. They might be anxious and actually get to the point where they could even be sort of anxious, depressed. And actually, so you've got a well-being scenario and you potentially got a performance scenario that's happening in the same person, but the roots of that could be perfectionism. So I think it can be quite tricky for an organisation to actually sort of deal with that. Ideally you need, I think, managers who have got sort of quite a coaching orientation so that they can potentially support an individual, and perhaps rather than, why isn't something done on time, actually do it well in a more coaching way than a disciplinary way if deadlines aren't met. Because I think some people go into performance management too quickly, and things, if you do it, it's just going to make their mental health worse in some respects, because it just fear is the thing that's driving it. So if you end up in that situation, the fear is potentially going to exacerbate it, and someone can't perform when they're in fear. It's the fight or flight response. So so I do think it's potentially a tricky one, and underneath some complex sort of performance cases within organisations, perfection could be sitting underneath it.
And are there any kind of positives associated with perfectionism?
I actually think there's a different perspective, which is positive striving, which isn't driven by fear. And that is that someone actually wants to improve how they're doing. They want to do a really good job. They may even want to do the cherry on top, but they are open-minded to feedback. They will collaborate with other people, and they will, you know, be prepared to flex the way they do things. The thing is with the perfectionist is they tend to be quite rigid in the way they do things. They don't cooperate, and they don't ask for feedback. So I think that's where the difference is. So, you know, and I really don't like practice makes perfect. I really don't like that phrase. For me, practice makes habit, and habit creates mastery. It's a completely different sort of scenario than actually perfectionism, because to a perfectionist, they never achieve where they're getting. Even praise they will bat off, because in their own mind there's still a discrepancy between where they thought they should have performed and where they perceive they would have performed. And that's where that sort of inner conflict comes with them.
I can remember at school, one of the kids saying, "Oh, well, practice makes perfect," and the teacher really telling them off and saying, "No," and kind of reiterating the way that you did, saying, "Practice will make permanent, but also make sure that what you're practicing is what you should be practicing if you don't want to make bad habits." And I remember thinking, "What there?" But now, it does actually make sense. So well done.
But the thing is, there is a narrative, and you know, and the thing that sort of makes me wince sometimes is when people ask what their weaknesses are, and they go, "Well, I'm a perfectionist." Well, for me, that's a complete red flag, because you know, because they try and sort of do it as a, you know, it's a positive really, because I get things, you know, accurate and all the rest of it, but there's a big difference between accurate and correct and actually perfect. So individuals who are perfect or say they've got perfectionism as a weakness but try and sort of, you know, spin it as a strength, actually, you know, may not be the right hire. And an interesting thing that did come up in my research was around agile working, because a lot of organisations now are operating sort of an agile working environment, and obviously you need to have tolerance of ambiguity when you're working agile. You need flexibility and cooperation, and a number of the respondents to my research actually flagged that individuals who had perfectionism may struggle in that type of environment.
Okay. What about kind of tools that can help people? Are there any tools that can help people manage perfectionism? And is it something that we should want people to stop doing or people to curb, in your view?
I think it's a case of awareness first. You have to be aware. And the red flags for perfectionism are potentially overworking, and that is obsessive, not I'm choosing to work, but actually if I'm not working longer hours, there's something wrong. So it's almost an obsessive overworking. There's loads of research around perfectionism, workaholism, and also burnout. It sits underneath burnout as well. So I think, you know, it is important to try and curb it, but I think an awareness that actually trying to be perfect is counterproductive, and accepting that actually you might need to do something. And the thing is, a lot of perfectionists can end up being lonely because they shut off, because they don't want to cooperate, they don't want to sort of get asked for feedback. So, you know, they might not look like it in an office, but if you or in, especially in the environment we are now, working remotely, they can easily not sort of, you know, interact as much with the team and hope that the work that they put in is actually okay and is actually good enough.
Okay.
So the other things I think people can do is trying to stop comparing. I think comparison is a big one. And like, I'm exactly the same as you, Trish. When I started off and I saw other coaches out there and people doing stuff, you know, and it's like a bit like, it's like, oh my God, all these people are doing this stuff and I've been doing this 5 minutes, you know, but, you know, you plough your own furrow type of thing. You take your own path, no one's on the same path because our lives are all different. So I think there's that trying to stop compare. Mindfulness has been proven to sort of be helpful, certain types of mindfulness, because you're neither in the past or the future. Because a lot of perfectionists are either worrying about what they've done or getting anxious and anticipating what might happen. And there's quite a lot of research, if it's actually quite serious, that actually certain types of CBT can help around those belief systems, negative belief systems that they hold. And if some of that does come from childhood or certain things that have happened in their life, then actually at a serious level, it could support them to actually, develop new internal beliefs and new ways of sort of talking to themselves. And it's changing that critical voice as well. And actually being more compassionate to ourselves, because we can develop that quite negative sort of internal dialogue. Why didn't I do it like this? I could have done it like that. It's not good enough. All those types of things that go through. But it's looking at the bigger picture, and actually in the context of what I've been asked to do, I've done it. And it's also around communication, and that can actually make people feel a bit vulnerable, but it's taking small steps to communicate, I think, and be really open with the people you're working with around what's expected of you. Because I think sometimes perfectionists assume a certain level of requirement when actually that's not really the case. And I did have that with a client, actually. She had to do a presentation, and she thought she had 3 weeks to do this presentation, and they pulled it forward, so she only had a week, and it was the following week after we had a session, and she was getting really anxious about it. I'm not prepared, I haven't got all my information, etc., etc. And I said, well, you can only do the best you can with what you've got, and actually explain at the very beginning of your presentation that where we are in the research at the moment, this is the information I've got, this is where I've got to, and there could be potentially some additional pieces to add, but on the timeline we're at X. And she came back in the following session and said they thought it was amazing. I went, oh, that's interesting. Now, she was worried that she hadn't done all this stuff, but actually it's the communication that's important. So even at the beginning of a job, rather than take it on and go off, get some clarity. What are the timelines? What's the expectation, etc.? And keep that dialogue open. It's going to feel uncomfortable for them to start with, because it's going to be something they don't do. But actually, open communication about expectations is one of the best things to do, and just develop that relationship better rather than backing off.
I have to say that's one of my kind of bugbears in the workplace. I used to work for a boss who'd say, we need to do this and we need to do that, and I'd say, okay, is it we or is it me?
Let's
be clear about who's doing what and when do you need it by. That's personal preference. That really helps.
Exactly. And also always email back. My understanding from the meeting was XYZ. If it's any different, can we just clarify? I think clarifying as you go along is, and keeping that communication open, even if it irritates them a bit, and to start with, I don't think that's a problem, because if it makes you feel better, then, along the way, rather than backing off, avoiding any conversation, and meeting some expectations that are way beyond what others are expecting from you.
Okay. And how do you go about helping individuals, organizations with these sorts of, so you've got a hell of a lot of knowledge. So how do you help people?
Just bear with me while I have a lovely coffee bit.
No worries, go for it.
Right, how do I help people? I help people one-to-one. So I have individuals come to me directly. They're normally at a point in life where they're fed up, they're doubting if they're in the right place, and they're sometimes second guessing how they've got where they have to, and what future that lies ahead for them. Midlife is the time when the person we thought we would be meets the person we really are. And actually going back to some of the things we've discussed here, we pick up lots of beliefs on the way of what we should be doing. And then we need to let some of them go at midlife because they're not appropriate anymore. I also help some employers with onboarding. So I do the Hogan Leadership Assessment. So I help with some recruitment processes as an independent, and also help with onboarding as well. So they're things that I do.
Amazing. And how can people get hold of you if borrow your brain for a bit?
www.humandecisions.co.uk, or find me on LinkedIn.
Oh, bless you. Are you all right?
I am okay, yeah.
Oh, good. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting to chat.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, amazing. All right. And hopefully we can have you back again another time.
Thank you. Yes.
Fabulous stuff. All right. I will speak to you again very, very soon.
Thank you.